Hello, and welcome back to Season 2 of the Atlanta Opera's BlinkOpera podcast. I'm mezzo-soprano Blythe Gaissert, and I'm excited to make my debut this summer at Atlanta Opera as Hannah in the chamber opera As One. I'm thrilled to be your host for this week's episode on composer Laura Kaminsky, librettist Mark Campbell, and librettist and filmmaker Kimberly Reed's important work. The concept for As One is the brainchild of composer Laura Kaminsky. The idea came to her after reading an article in the New York Times during the fight for marriage equality. The article was about a married couple where the husband was in the middle of transitioning. Laura was moved by the realization that if the law did not pass, once the husband completed their transition, the couple would no longer be legally married, as they would be a same-sex couple. She thought the issues this raised were ripe for an opera. Who are we? In ourselves, in our relationships, in society. What are we willing to give up in order to be our truest self? She spent years mulling this idea over before viewing the documentary Prodigal Sons and getting to know its filmmaker, Kimberly Reed. The two hit it off, and they began to collaborate on the concept for the opera. To create the perfect trio, Mark Campbell, one of opera's greatest wordsmiths, was brought on as co-librettist. Kim and Mark used Kim's experience as a jumping-off point for Hannah's character, but they also used stories they had heard from friends. And frankly, some of it's just total fiction. It was important to them that the story be a predominantly positive and realistic story, as so many trans stories that are told are so tragic and deal with more sensational aspects. This story is about someone just like you or me that happens to also be trans. Since its premiere by American Opera Projects at the Bam Fisher Theater in Brooklyn, New York in September 2014, As One has had more than 50 productions. It is celebrated as the most performed new American work of its time, and I'm thrilled that the As One production in Atlanta will be my 10th production. I've been fortunate to be involved since the very beginning of the opera, when the creators were workshopping the piece, and it's been very interesting to see how the work has evolved, especially the final scene, which really fits my voice like a glove. I love all the low notes. I've seen As One have a profound effect on the communities where I've had the privilege to perform it. For me, it's not only something that's impacted my professional life, but also my personal life. I have 2 children, and it changed how I'm raising them. I wanted to make sure that they had a wide lens to see the world through. When my oldest child saw the opera at age 7, they were struck by the fact that Hannah's story was about someone like them. They said to me, "I don't understand why she was so scared to tell her family, though, because we're all still the same on the inside." Since then, they have recently told me they are non-binary, and this is the only job they're okay with me leaving town for. They think people need to hear Hannah's story. I can't say that any of this really surprised me. No matter where I've performed the piece, all over this country, people, no matter who they are, find themselves connected to Hannah's story. As One is a chamber opera. This means that it's small in the number of forces it uses to be performed. It is played out by 2 voices, a mezzo-soprano and a baritone, who share the part of a sole transgender protagonist, Hannah, and a string quartet. The 3-part narrative is made up of 15 songs. Now, let's dive into the plot and learn more about Hannah's story. Part 1 opens as Hannah is looking back. In the memory paper route, Hannah rides around her suburban neighborhood delivering newspapers and revels in her more feminine impulses, like how it feels just to ride her bike right before sunrise while wearing a blouse. It was stolen from a neighbor's clothesline, by the way.
It isn't much, but fits might well your frame.
Once the route is over, she feels that she has to hide the blouse and her true self when returning home. Hannah then remembers several times she has had to conform to gender norms in her youth. Everything from the way she wrote in the song Cursive to the amplified awkwardness that she felt in sex ed class make Hannah feel she doesn't fit into either room. The feeling of isolation continues into junior high as we see Hannah give a dissenting opinion on the John Donne poem, No Man is an Island. She is alone. An island. She says, I need no one. No one needs me. I consigned myself to my own island long ago. Long ago. Part 1 closes with To Know, as she seeks and discovers understanding about herself at a local library. Hannah learns that she's not actually alone in the world. There's a name for who she is. And seeing that there are others who are like her, she is given a great sense of hope. Part 2 opens with Hannah's college years. She searches and sometimes struggles with her divided existence. In 2 cities, she recalls what it is like to go across the bridge from Oakland to San Francisco and the freedom of living as her true self, as well as the difficulty in returning to perpetuate the lie. Finally, Hannah encounters the joy of being perceived as she wishes in 3 words. And this inspires her decision to undergo hormone therapy. After tossing back the first dose with liquid courage, it isn't quite what she thought it would be, and she feels quite unsettled and confused. As she waits and waits for the difference she wants physically, she takes comfort in the changes that are happening on the inside. And then when the changes finally happen on the outside, she feels joy in the sense of unity. The joy is somewhat short-lived as the holidays approach. In the songs Dear Son and Christmas Story, Hannah reflects on how she became increasingly distanced from her family and her past. She decides not to go home for the holidays and reveal her true self. She calls instead. She receives an awkward note from her mother saying she sounded quiet and that her parents just want her to be happy. On Christmas Day, she meets a cute stranger in a coffee shop who flirts a little and makes her feel at ease in her body and mind. She enjoys the encounter for just what it is. 2 people who need to make a connection while alone on such a day. Being isolated from her family is only one of the risks that Hannah has to take. In Out of Nowhere, Hannah escapes a harrowing assault that prompts her to want to understand more about the darkest side of her new world, as well as understanding some of the fear every woman has in a parking lot. She can't live the way she was, but it's very dangerous to be who she is. Reacting to the conflicting voices in her head and realizing the need for more clarity, she gets up the gumption to go on a physical and spiritual journey to find the answer. In the final part of the opera, Hannah travels to Norway, in the middle of nowhere. It's exciting to be there, and she feels she will finally find some answers from the universe. In all this beauty, there has to be an answer if she just listens. What happens in Norway takes us from the ridiculous, like failing to make her own jam, to the sublime moment, finally hearing the answer she has been searching for. It is a simple yet surprising equation that will help her achieve her happiness. This is how she was made. All of it. She just is. If you enjoyed learning more about As One, please rate and review this podcast on Apple Podcasts. It's a great way for more people like you to find out about our content. And don't forget to follow the Atlanta Opera Podcast for more great episodes. I'm mezzo-soprano Blythe Gaissert. Thank you for joining me on this week's episode of the Atlanta Opera Podcast, BlinkOpera.